Hello, my name is Natalya Kolosowsky, and I am the founder, director, and designer of the Shadow Tender project. So, what is Shadow Tender? We are an independent, collaborative, creative project and teaching methodology. Our purpose is to create tools to help people encounter and explore their relationship to the other. In order to understand our work, it is first very important to explain the Jungian shadow. Carl Jung observed that human beings have a persona self, a public face that we present consciously, and something he called the shadow, where we store things we would rather not acknowledge or have been taught to fear. Often this shadow part is unconscious. The more unaware we are of our shadows, the more we project them onto others. The result? Seeing a monster or a demon in front of you instead of an actual human being. In other words, dehumanization. By learning about and integrating our shadows, both individually and societally, we profoundly expand our capacity for empathy and connection with others. This is where our name, Shadow Tender, comes from. To date, we have created 2 evening-length performances. The first, Libra 1, premiered in Taipei, Taiwan in 2017. The second performance, Libra 2, premiered at Wuto College Performance Festival in 2019 in Portland, Oregon. We've also taught a number of workshops, facilitated various group discussions and salons on these subjects. So why this project? Why is this work important? The world is seeing a global rise in extremist nationalistic policy, which is a large-scale systemic form of these psychological mechanisms of othering and projection. What is interesting to me are the ways in which various types of costume elements can be used to play with the demonization-victimization dichotomy and thus begin to tease out a very embodied, immediate, haptic understanding of empathy and connection where there may not have been any before. In order for this to work, however, we have to strictly constrain our focus to personal demons, stories, and narratives, since an embodied practice is inherently rooted in individual experience of self as matter in space. Prior to becoming a costume designer, I spent several years working within the field of existential social psychology, studying something called terror management theory. According to this theory, human beings have an innate terror of biological death, which we are constantly mitigating through culture and systems of belief. Ultimately, the research shows that belief systems are inevitable and necessary. Human beings have to believe something, including some type of story about themselves, an identity, in order to have a functional, healthy social self within which to interface with the world. So in this way, our cognitive identities, that is, who we think we are, can be seen as a necessary costume for the existential masquerade of life. And the various components of this identity can be seen as the different materials that a costume element may be constructed out of. The symbolic meaning that we project onto the material is a very personal choice, and it is ultimately arbitrary. It all depends on the system of belief that you are operating under. A bead or a piece of velvet will mean something to one person, but it may carry completely different meaning for another person. For the purposes of Shadow Tender, the specific meaning doesn't actually matter. What matters is that there is meaning, and that we're able to get the meaning to shift, preferably from multiple directions. Returning to Jung's notion of the shadow for a moment, just like a three-dimensional object will have light and dark sides depending on the light source, a human being will also have psychological shadow and light material that is context-specific. Thus, if you change the light source, for example, if you switch a cultural context in which different things are valued and rewarded, the shadow will also shift. Drawing on all of these ideas, both from terror management theory and Jungian psychology, Shadow Tender uses wearable objects to create controlled microcosms within which multiple kinds of identity shifts can occur. consequently giving people embodied insight and understanding of their own unconscious fears and projections. So, a little bit about our process. First, we work exclusively with the body to facilitate discovery of the kinesthetic and emotional self. Since the project is deeply collaborative, we have a breadth of lineages and containers to draw from for this work. The purpose is to playfully and carefully interrogate one's physical relationship to the body and provide an opening for something new and unexpected to emerge. During this part of the process, we tend to leave quite a bit of space for private reflection through journaling, sketching, etc. Our second step is we design and create masks and other costume elements. For us, the haptics are more important than aesthetics. We are interested in decisions and desires that emerge spontaneously and somatically, bottom up, rather than cognitively, top down. An interesting discovery I've made when teaching this material is that the less time somebody has to think about what they're making, the more aesthetically innovative and fantastical their creations. All right, so we have a body in space, we have an object. What's next? The third step is an exploration and witnessing of the mask as a discrete physical entity. Here, we draw on exercises from object theater and the work of Barbara Mettler. As a costume designer, this is an aspect of the work that I find particularly challenging, since it requires an abstraction from the original function of the costume element. The goal is to observe, interact, and play with your own creation truly as an other, as an independent physical collaborator in space with its own textures, shapes, weight, etc. Now, we have created opportunities for shifts in how one perceives the object of their body, and we have created the mask, and we have created some shifts in how one perceives the object of the mask. The final step is to combine the body and the mask in motion. Here, we begin to explore what it may be like to connect with, move, wear the mask, and witness the mask being worn by another body. This last step of not only wearing, but also witnessing and being witnessed is a vital component of the work. Why? The integration of shadow material requires that we revisit and re-envision our cognitive identities, essentially re-scripting the stories of who we think we are. As terror management theory has shown, our cognitive identities and beliefs are social functions. Thus, in order for a meaningful shift in identity to occur, it must be done within a social framework. It is for this reason that the last step of the shadow tender process always involves some form of witnessing, whether that is a one-on-one reflection, a group dance, a public performance, or a community dialogue. We strive to create containers in which relationships to the external world can begin to reinforce the new relationship to self and vice versa. So, what is the larger takeaway here? As we, in the 21st century, face growing geopolitical displacement, and thus increasing tensions between different cultures and belief systems, there is a clear need for effective tools to understand and negotiate the connection between self and other. How can we, as scholars of costume, participate in the creation of policy, structures, and systems that enable greater empathy and understanding on a larger societal level? What concrete tools and insights can the field of critical costume studies provide in navigating the social realities of the 21st century? What connections, collaborations, and resources must be set in place for those tools to not only be effective, but also accessible? These are the questions that guide my work with Shadow Tender, and I hope may inspire curiosity and dialogue for you as well. The most important thing that Shadow Tender has taught me over and over and over again is that our personal demons are not morally static entities that can somehow be permanently extinguished or eradicated, but rather dynamic living extensions of ourselves that will always require an ongoing awareness and mitigation. In other words, we are permanently bound to our demons. And since we can't banish them, it might be far wiser to learn from them, give them a mask, invite them to dance an existential masquerade of life.